A common misconception about deep meaning is that it's something innate. What I mean by this is that if you were to look at something and consider it profound, you do so under the assumption that meaning was intended. I see this rhetoric most commonly applied to art in its various forms. So, for example, while fine art such as a Leonardo da Vinci painting is unmistakably profound, art expressed through less legitimate forms, well, could the same be said? Before I begin today's episode, I want to provide those of you who aren't familiar with the series some background information on Monster Hunter. Monster Hunter is a fantasy hunting simulation game developed and published by the prolific Japanese game developer Capcom. Monster Hunter debuted on the PlayStation 2 in 2004, and the game began development as part of an internal initiative to release titles that could capitalize on the growing online multiplayer video game market. 3 video games were developed for this initiative, and while Monster Hunter was successful, it was only notable in Japan, and it wasn't until the release of Monster Hunter Portable 2nd G, localized as Monster Hunter Freedom Unite on the PlayStation Portable, the series started making a name for itself in other regions, particularly the States. My journey with the Monster Hunter franchise began on the Wii U with Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate, and the only reason I was willing to try it out was because of my older brother's eagerness to do the same. At the time, 3U was the latest North American release in the series, and fans were actively playing that in anticipation of its next major installment, Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate. I remember sitting on the couch behind him, utterly confused, the night my brother purchased and began playing the former. Don't get me wrong, this Monster Hunter looked cool, but I had absolutely no idea what he was doing. Instead of simply talking to an NPC, starting a quest, and then killing a monster, my brother would put down the gamepad to look at his phone, and then run aimlessly through a segmented map, catching bugs, and swinging a pickaxe. What was I watching? Eventually, he bought a 3DS and abandoned 3U in favor of 4U. Okay, cool. Now that I had the Wii U all to myself, it was my turn to give the game a shot, and I absolutely hated it. Creating my hunter was simple enough. There aren't many ways to screw up character creation after all, so I was somewhat optimistic the actual game wouldn't be as confusing as it looked before. What an idiot. For one, Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate does not have a tutorial. I refuse to call its opening segment that. The sequence does such a poor job of introducing the player to the game's mechanics and systems that omitting it entirely would not diminish 3U's value in the least. I mean, even with its inclusion, I'm sure most people felt as if they were just dropped into the game upon startup. Regardless, I refused to give up and was determined to learn exactly how this game worked. I approached my brother hoping he could provide me with some guidance as I had no idea what to do. He broke down the game's quest system, explaining specifically how clearing key and urgent quests are how I am supposed to progress through it. Okay, that makes sense. First I clear each level's key quests, and then finish the urgent to get promoted to the next. That sounds simple enough, so how do I know which quests are key? The game doesn't tell you, so you just search them up online. It was definitely a shock to hear I had to rely upon the internet to properly play Monster Hunter, but again, I was super determined to get the hang of it. Clearing the level 1 village quest was easy enough. After all, none require you to hunt any large monsters. But I hit a wall once I entered the second level and encountered the Great Jaggy. Now, the Great Jaggy itself wasn't the issue, considering it's a glorified punching bag. The problem came with crafting its armor. I heard the Monster Hunter series is at its best when experienced with others, so I was very eager to bolster my gear as soon as possible so I could head online. My brother thought I should be good to go after acquiring a full set of Jaggy gear, so that was my goal. I was still getting the hang of this style of gameplay, so it wasn't exactly a walk in the park, but I eventually managed to gather most of the parts needed for the set. Gathering bones and iron ore was simple enough. I knew where to find those from past exploration, but getting that special macallite ore, not so much. After hours of mining with nothing to show for it, I figured maybe the internet could tell me how to get one of these things, just like it helped me with key quests. Okay, so it's gatherable in both the Deserted Island and Sandy Plains. That's perfect, considering those were the only 2 maps I had access to. Oh wow, it's telling me these specific areas to mine too? This is gonna be a piece of cake. It was not a piece of cake. If I thought 3U was anything, it was a piece of shit game, because even though I mined for that entire session, I did not get a single Macalite ore. That was the last straw. After that point, I decided Monster Hunter was not for me. The hunts themselves were pretty cool, even though I only got to experience them with 2 large monsters, but they weren't enough to make up for the clunky menus and lack of clarity with its mechanics and systems. With school and my other games to keep me preoccupied, it would be months before I would pick up 3 Ultimate again. My brother was enjoying 4 Ultimate with a few of his friends, and while that looked like a ton of fun, I didn't own a 3DS yet, so I couldn't join in. I really wanted to get into Monster Hunter, but each time I would think of giving it another go, I'd be reminded of my super negative initial experience. Eventually, my desire to fully experience what this series truly had to offer would grow to overwhelming proportions, and one day, when I had absolutely nothing else to do, I decided I'd bite the bullet and give 3U another chance. First, I hunkered down and did some studying. I watched a bunch of video tutorials on YouTube and read into the particular mechanics that tripped me up during my initial time with the game. Specifically, I learned about drop rates and how forging equipment worked. I also learned about how important it was to properly prepare for a hunt by dedicating time to gathering materials that can be used to craft essential items like potions and antidotes. The longer I spent studying, the more the game made sense. Would you imagine that? And after a couple of hours, I felt I was truly ready to hop back into 3U. I loaded up my save and instantly got to work tracking down the Macalite ore. That time, if I had a run where I didn't get a single ore, I'd simply end the quest and start a new one. This method was much more efficient, and eventually I got all that I needed to complete my Blade Master Jaggy set. Finally, I felt I was ready to enter Portanzia and take the hunt online. And what a hunt that was. Never have I struck a chord with a game in the same way I did 3U's online hub. It was fun, really fun. Near the end of my time with 3U, I decided I was enjoying myself enough to invest into a 3DS of my own so I could experience other Monster Hunter titles, specifically Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate since my brother would constantly rave about it, and the upcoming Monster Hunter Generations. Monster Hunter Generations I was particularly excited for because it would be the first title to release after I had become a fully fledged fan of the series. For those of you who don't know, Monster Hunter Cross, localized as Generations, was released as the 10th anniversary title for the franchise. What piqued my interest about Generations in particular was the game's vision, how it approached building upon pre-established mechanics and concepts. Inspired by the creative ways the Monster Hunter community would play these titles, the team behind Generations introduced hunters to hunter arts and hunting styles. To put it simply, hunter arts are just special moves, extravagant, devastating attacks that can be used to inflict colossal amounts of damage. Hunting styles, however, are a bit more unique. Guild style is for those who wish to play each weapon as they were, with no revisions or additions aside from the 2 slots designated for hunter arts. Striker style is tailored for those who wish to utilize the hunter arts to their max potential. With Striker, the hunter art gauges build up much faster, allowing for frequent use of arts. Aerial style is exactly what you'd think. Finally, Adept style was made for those of us who like to hunt more offensively. With Adept style, if a player can manage to dodge into a monster's attack at the right time, they'll be granted a short period of invincibility they can use to either retreat or execute a devastating counterattack. In addition to the arts and styles, Generations introduced an entirely unique way of play in the form of Prowler mode, which allows players to instead hunt as their palicos, the feline companions that were introduced to the series in Monster Hunter Freedom Unite. These were all very exciting additions, and I loved watching them in action via the cross-Japanese footage while Generations was upcoming its release. What I think excited me the most about the game, however, was its featuring 4 flagship monsters. I know some of you are already wondering what that is, so just know, a flagship is simply the monster featured on the game's cover. Usually, this monster is given some sort of significance via the offline single-player village content. Glavenus, Mitsusune, Astalos, and Gameth were so distinct from one another in terms of behaviors and environments. On top of that, they all have phenomenal designs. I could not wait to hunt them myself. One thing I did not like about Generations, though, was its name. Not only is Monster Hunter Cross significant of multiple things, those being the 4 flagships, 4 hunting styles, and the 10th anniversary of the franchise itself, but it also just sounds so cool. I did not go into this video with the intention of getting anyone fired, but Capcom, I'm gonna need the ID number of the man responsible for what is unmistakably a crime against humanity. But Mono, don't you already know that? Of course I know who it is. Jeremy, I see your punk ass. Stop covering that badge. I'm going to count down from 3, and if I don't see the rest of that Capcom employee ID, your ass is in fact grass. 3, 2, 1. With every passing day, I drew closer to getting to experience my very first new Monster Hunter game, and when launch day finally came, I made sure to snag a copy for both myself and my brother as soon as possible. Earlier, I said up until that point, I had never experienced anything like 3 Ultimate's online hub. Well, funnily enough, up until this point, I had never experienced anything like Monster Hunter Generations. Although I bought a copy for my brother, when the game released, he was out of state and it'd be some time before he'd come home and be able to play with me. I didn't want to make too much progress in the online quests without him, so I instead opted to focus on completing village quests. Aww, that's so nice. I did not stick to the village quests. I take it back, you suck. I remember finishing the 1-star level village quests and quickly losing interest because of how mindless they felt. I paid $40 for this game, everyone. I was not going to restrict myself to delivering mushrooms until my brother returned. So I took to the online hub and started knocking out key quests one after the other. This was a lot of fun. Since this game had just released, there were a ton of random hunters at my level I could experience it with. Keep in mind, since I began playing 3 Ultimate long after it had released, most of the lobbies I joined were populated by hunters with ranks far above my own. It was refreshing being able to tackle hunts with hunters whose gear was just as terrible as mine. I quickly graduated from low rank to high rank quests, and since I had now done more than collecting mushrooms, I felt comfortable slowing down my pace so I could experience the rest of the guild content with my brother and our friends. Besides, finishing the low rank online quests left me with good enough gear to get through the rest of the single player village quests no problem. At this point, I was absolutely loving the game. I played through 3 Ultimate with the sword and shield, and since that was the weapon I was the most comfortable with, I stuck with it for Generations. I'm sure many of you will agree with me when I say this, but Monster Hunter Generations is the most versatile the sword and shield has ever been. You can do so much with it in this game. First, let's talk about how this weapon operates under different hunting styles. Guild style is just like missionary, simple and timeless. It feels just as good too. Homie, there are children watching. Wait, has he even had? Striker style is my personal sword and shield favorite. The weapon's standard moveset is simplified, but not to the point where it feels butchered. Besides, the style's less intricate combos are easily extendable via the use of any of the sword and shield's fantastic hunter arts. Round Force is the epitome of versatility. It's a swift 360-degree slash that's great for dishing out quick damage. In addition to this, the third tier of the attack actually launches your comrades into the air, so if you're all coordinated enough, it's beyond helpful in executing mounts. Sword Dance is a devastating combo attack that unleashes a barrage of slashes onto a monster. This hunter art is hot as f***. Nothing excites me quite like landing it on a helpless, toppled monster. That's right, we love cyberbullying the digital wildlife here on the MonoCRYPTIC YouTube channel. This final Sword and Shield hunter art is my personal favorite. If Sword Dance gets me hot, then Shoryugeki gets me f***ing steaming. Look at this, you uppercut the monster with the shield, which obviously does KO damage, and once you unlock the third tier of the art, you finish it off with a brutal downward slash of the sword. Aerial style is neat, but it's not the one to go for with the weapon, especially since Adept Sword and Shield's dodge attack launches a hunter into the air, allowing for easy mounting damage. The final and coolest addition to the weapon were the new oil items. There are 4 oils in total. Affinity Oil, which gives your weapon a 30% affinity buff, Stamina Oil, which deals additional KO and exhaust damage, Destroyer Oil, which makes it easier to break monsters' parts, and finally Mind's Eye Oil, which applies the same effects of the Mind's Eye skill, which prevents your weapon from bouncing off monsters at lower sharpness levels. All oil effects are stackable and work in tandem with your pre-existing armor skills. Again, just to reiterate, when taking the styles, its arts, and the oils into account, Monster Hunter Generations and Generations Ultimate are easily the best the weapon has been in series history.
But Mono, Sword and Shield was so much better in Monster Hunter World.
Shut up. No, it wasn't. I'd like to preface the next part of the story by further detailing the direction behind Generations. As I said before, the game was developed and released as a way to celebrate the 10th anniversary of Monster Hunter. With it being an anniversary title, most of the content in the game was brought back from earlier in the series. For example, the only new village in Generations is the starting one, Burna. The other locales are returning. Generations offline content is easily my second favorite in the series, which is ironic considering I thought it'd be a waste of my time. How it all concludes is easily the best part of the experience. Your final task as a village hunter was to tackle all 4 of Generations' flagships, and each quest was given by one of the 4 village elders. Burna's elder requested you bring down the mighty Glavenus. Kokoto's elder had you take care of the electrifying Astalos. Poke's elder needed your hunter to topple the colossal and chillingly powerful Gammoth. And Yukumo's elder requests you hunt the elegant yet deadly Mitsusune. Everything from the setup to the execution of these quests was perfect, and by the time the credits started rolling, I was feeling an entirely different sort of way about video games. Keep in mind, at this point I was still a Monster Hunter newbie, and so there were times where Generations village quests really challenged me. Once I cleared them all, I felt really proud of myself. This time there was no one to pick up the slack when I wasn't doing enough damage or carded during a quest. Finishing the hunt was all on me, and I was only able to do so because I was determined to become a better hunter. I took the time to learn how to properly play my weapon, build armor sets, organize my items, and most importantly, build a reliable companion with my Palico. Speaking of which, let's dedicate some time to talking about Generations' Palico system, because there's a lot to be said. Just like with the Sword and Shield, it's without a doubt Generations' approach to Palicos is the best in the entire series. The Palico Ranch is a new locale introduced in Generations, dedicated solely to the development of Palicos. It's here you can scout out new allies, train pre-existing ones, send out groups of Palicos to collect scraps for armor and weapons via the Meowster Hunters, epic pun, I know, and finally trade for materials and items. What makes Generations' system superior to other iterations is how much customizability it gives the player. For example, in Monster Hunter World, the only customization afforded to the player is choosing which specialized tool their Palico enters battle with. In Generations, players can not only choose which type of support their Palico specializes in, whether that be healing, bombing, or trapping, but they can also rearrange their companion skills and support moves as well as teach them new ones. This game allowed for players to fine-tune their allies' abilities to absurd degrees, and it resulted in Palicos that are hyper-responsive and leagues more supportive during a hunt. Honestly, there were times where I felt it'd be more beneficial for me to tackle a quest with just my Palicos as opposed to other hunters, because I believed I'd have a much easier time with the former. I was immensely disappointed this system wasn't further built upon in World, but thankfully it seems Rise has taken a similar approach with its scouting system, so I hope that game sets the stage for Generations system to return, or one of a similar magnitude to take its place. Anyway, as I was saying, I feel tackling Generations offline content was my Monster Hunter initiation, if that makes sense. I was finally acclimated to the series and how it operated, and that got me very excited to finish tackling the game's online content. When I finished the village quest line, my brother had been home for quite some time and had already started playing through the low rank online quest to meet my progress. Once he got there, we began working through high rank alongside some of our friends, and only stopped once we had a healthy pool of monsters to begin forging equipment out of. Nothing was safe for me and the boys at this point, man. Cyberbullying is no longer a term accurate enough to describe what we did to the digital wildlife. We ravaged this game. More specifically, the new variant monsters exclusive to Generations and Generations Ultimate, Deviants. I have never been a fan of monster subspecies. If I'm being entirely honest, most of them simply felt like recolors with basic value tweaks and nothing more. The way I see it, if effort is going to be expended for the sake of creating a monster variation, then make those variations meaningful. The reason I love Generations' Deviant system is because its changes are just that, meaningful. The idea behind Deviant monsters is their monster variants so rare and deadly, hunters must change how they hunt in order to compensate. For example, let's take a Rathian and her deviant counterpart, the Dread Queen Rathian. Normal Rathians behave akin to a standard Rathalos, attacking with tail swipes and fire, but focusing more on injecting hunters with the poison stored in the spikes on their tails. Conversely, in addition to just behaving more aggressively, the Dread Queen Rathian spits hotter flames and attacks with a vastly more potent type of poison called deadly poison. These changes are consistent across all deviant monsters. They are bigger, possess unique behaviors and new attacks, and generally look more intimidating and refined. This idea is perfect for the series because I believe it's wholly reflective of the process we see in ourselves as hunters. I mean, just earlier, I explained how overcoming challenges molded me into a more capable hunter, and I'm sure that's true for everyone watching this video. Monster Hunter games are designed in a way that ensures you will fail eventually, and I feel this isn't to turn players away from these games, but rather provide them with a more meaningful and intimate sense of progress. How you hunt in-game is reflective of more than just your weapons and armor. It's reflective of your evolving mindset. Applying that same philosophy to the series monsters is ingenious, and I hope that at some point the concept makes a comeback. Deviants are referred to as the supremacy species in the Japanese versions of these games, and for good reasons. The beasts truly reign supreme. After we had forged all of the equipment we needed, my party refocused to clearing high rank, and then had fun with the endgame content until the next adventure reared its head. I've gotta say, Generations had a superb selection of endgame elder dragons. I don't think it counts considering it's the elder you have to hunt in order to unlock the endgame, but DECRYPTION is easily my favorite of the bunch. It's a giant cuttlefish that wears bones as armor and lives in a system of underwater caves composed of monster remains known as the Wyvern's Ends. On top of that, it mimics the attack patterns of monsters like the Brachydios and Uragon by wearing their skulls on its tentacles, shoots lasers, and looks badass as all hell when it gets enraged. Hunting DECRYPTION is nothing less of a spectacle, and I'm honestly a little disappointed we've yet to get another elder that's so unique in its design and execution. I mean, just look at its death animation. It's legit the coolest thing I think I've ever seen in my entire life. In my previous video, How to Perfect Underwater Hunting, I said that Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate was my favorite Monster Hunter game. And while it is in many ways, I don't think that's entirely true. On a surface level, maybe, but if I were to dig deep and pick a true favorite, I'd have to choose Monster Hunter Generations. Generations released the summer before my junior year of high school, and anyone who knows me is well aware that was a very difficult period in my life. I won't go into immense detail considering how personal the topic is, but all you need to know is I wasn't doing great. I was tired and angry about every aspect of my life, and all of those feelings culminated in me effectively shutting myself off from any significant human interaction for about 2 years. The reason I bring this up in regards to Monster Hunter is because Generations afforded me with something I desperately needed at the time, an escape. Back then, I really wanted to find success where I was failing, but my environment was so toxic to my psyche, I couldn't be bothered to put in the effort. I used to think of myself as lazy and worthless, but looking back now, I can see that wasn't the case. What I really needed was a bit of nurturement, and I got that through Monster Hunter. One of the reasons I've come to love this series so much is because it's built upon this principle of providing players with the tools to handle any engagement however they see fit. I feel like this idea was fully realized with Monster Hunter World, but inklings of its potential are definitely reflected within Generations. Teaching myself how to play the game more effectively, and then gaining the more practical skills later on made me feel as though I could truly be good at something, especially if I put my all into it. I felt validated when I played Monster Hunter, and that was honestly enough to keep me going. Then there are the more interpersonal implications of my time with Generations. By that, I'm specifically referring to how this game helped improve a relationship with someone who means a lot to me. You may have noticed I've been mentioning my older brother throughout this entire video. I love this dude. He is an inspiration to me, and so it pains me to say that for the longest time we did not have the best relationship. We were super close as kids, but as time went on we grew apart. I don't think it was until we started playing Monster Hunter together we began rebuilding what was lost. During that entire period, my brother became the only person I felt I had any genuine connection with, and without that I'm not sure if I'd be who I am today. My time playing this game with him will forever be some of my most cherished memories, and they were the biggest reason why Generations Ultimate's announcement hit me like a truck. I vividly remember the day the announcement was made. I was walking from US history into my Spanish class. We weren't supposed to be on our phones at all during school, but my attitude towards everything was so soured I did not care. My phone vibrates, I pull it out, and at the top of my notifications all I see is Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate announcement trailer. I literally dropped to the floor and gasped as if a family member had died. As a matter of fact, a lot of my classmates thought that was what happened. Just seeing that title had left me shaking because, again, the moments I would have with my brother was all I felt I truly had back then. No words exist to describe how I felt knowing I wouldn't be losing that anytime soon. In hindsight, I should have realized this dude is related to me, so I'm stuck with him for life, but the point stands regardless. Monster Hunter Generations helped keep me anchored during a time when I was ready to fling myself into the abyss, and that's why I think this game will always be my true favorite of the series. The period upcoming Monster Hunter World's release was an interesting one to say the least. Obviously, based on the last section, World was not the Monster Hunter announcement I wanted. Before its reveal during Sony's E3 2017 presentation, information about the game was released via Capcom's registering Monster Hunter World as a global trademark. The company detailed how World was intended to be an entry point to the series for new players with streamlined mechanics and simpler game design. Remember, at this point the Monster Hunter series was anything but accessible, and after I had gotten past the series' steep learning curve, I felt that by dumbing down how these games played, Capcom would effectively turn me off from them entirely. I wasn't the only fan of the franchise who felt this way either. World's announcement was the first time I had witnessed any major discourse within the community. Many were soured by the lack of a Gen U localization announcement, but equally as many were excited we were getting the first HD Monster Hunter. Monster Hunter World launched globally, the first installment to do so, in January of 2018. However, I didn't play the game for myself until August of that same year when it was released on PC via Steam. I went into World as a cynic and left as a cynic because its base game was made for absolute f***ing babies. Monster Hunter World is the fifth mainline installment in the series, and the company's reasoning behind not simply naming it Monster Hunter 5 was because Capcom wanted the title to be more reflective of its focus, living and breathing ecosystems. I initially remember thinking I'd hate World because of its streamlining of the Monster Hunter formula, but after spending some time with the game, it started to feel less like streamlining and more like logical revisions, an evolution if you will. In older Monster Hunter games, maps were split into sections, and in order to transition between these areas, players had to go through loading screens. This was originally the result of the lacking hardware capabilities of the PlayStation 2, and considering all titles after released on equally lacking hardware, it was always necessary. Obviously, with the previous generation of consoles, the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One being leagues more powerful than their predecessors, there was no longer a need for segmented maps, and so with World, they transitioned to being entirely seamless. What I failed to realize upon World's announcement and during the period upcoming its release was that Capcom's decision to remove paintballs, items used to track monsters between areas, and rework how potions, whetstones, and gathering tools worked was to benefit the new seamless nature of these maps. For as much as I enjoy older Monster Hunter, I cannot deny the fact that when compared to World, those games are simply outdated. End of story. I'd still recommend playing through them considering there are features and monsters that can only be found in older titles, but if you simply can't adjust to how those games function, that's entirely understandable. Alongside seamless maps, World introduced new tracking features in a bid to give players a more grounded hunting experience. After loading into a quest, players can traverse the map and collect footprints, scratches, and other miscellaneous tracks left behind by monsters. Once they gather enough evidence, new tiny endemic life called scout flies disperse and fly towards a monster's location, leaving a trail for the hunter to follow. After explaining the process, it's clear these mechanics were implemented to make tracking monsters more nuanced and involved. In games prior, most players would literally just run area to area like idiots until they encountered the target. I remember thinking, Capcom, you're just telling us where the monster is. There's no challenge with tracking in the scout flies. Dog, there was never any challenge. You were literally just guessing where the monster was. That being said, while they are an improvement, the tracking and scout flies mechanics still aren't perfect. I think tracking is fun, but since the trails left by the scout flies are so unreliable, both just end up feeling kind of shallow. I much prefer the way Rise handles tracking by just giving the players the locations for each monster within the locale at the start of each quest. This is a hunting simulation series, so I do believe fleshed out hunting mechanics are right at home home in Monster Hunter, they just need to be fully developed. To reiterate, the biggest focus with World was creating environments that felt truly alive. That means denser and more detailed foliage with richer variations and smaller wildlife, and most importantly, more involved interactions between the hunter, the monster, and the space they both occupy. The most meaningful addition to the series in this regard has to be turf wars. Brief engagements between monsters typically resulting in a victor or, in certain cases, stalemates if both parties are of similar strength. This was not a feature I was particularly asking for, and that's just because it had never crossed my mind. Now that I've seen it in execution, however, I'm so glad it made its debut in the series, albeit later than it should have. I mean, just think about it. You have monsters fight one another in a game about hunting monsters. It's an idea that basically just conceptualizes itself. Environmental traps are another addition I feel belongs in the series, just not as is. There are certain areas in maps that are populated by natural hazards that can be either set off by the hunter or monster to inflict major damage on the latter. The hanging boulders in Ancient Forest are one of the better traps because they're super easy to trigger. Just shoot them. Other traps, however, are lacking because what triggers them is either unclear or too demanding. To this day, I have no idea how the quicksand pit in the Wildspire Waste functions at all. Again, utilizing the natural environment to your benefit during a hunt is a phenomenal idea. It's just one that shouldn't take precedent over the hunt itself. Unless the quest takes place in a specific locale, I don't even bother with the environmental traps because it just feels like a waste of energy and time. Still, generally speaking, Monster Hunter World's environment design is not only refreshing, but the right direction Capcom needed to take the series. And for as little as I liked Base World after playing it, this was something I felt always rang true. On that note, why didn't I like Base World? I mean, I just spent a hot minute talking about the game like it was the bee's f***ing knees. Honestly, I think all that boils down to is a lack of substance. I had a ton of fun with the game during my first playthrough, but after I finished it, I wasn't left with much to do. I don't know, after hunting Giratotis, Lavasioth the sequel so many times during the campaign, I wasn't really in any rush to do it again. Base World only had 31 large monsters, the least any game has had in the series, and while I understand why that was, it doesn't change the fact that its post-game content offers nothing of significant value.
But Mono, what about the sieges and collaboration events? Weren't those cool? Didn't you enjoy those?
Firstly, fuck Kulve Taroth, I hate that siege and loathe the fact that such a cool monster design was wasted on it. Secondly, I do not care for Final Fantasy or The Witcher. I'm playing Monster Hunter to play Monster Hunter. You know what? That's actually kind of fair. On a technical level, I will be the first to say World is the best designed Monster Hunter. Never have I uttered the words Monster Hunter World is a bad game, nor will I ever. I mean, World is the only game I can think of where you can watch an animal defecate, proceed to scoop up its stool, and then fling said stool back at it. You can literally make this game's bosses eat their own shit, and that is rad as fuck. My issue is, despite how much you dress up a rock, it'll always still be just a rock. It being the first HD Monster Hunter made World a landmark title, so many expected Capcom to debut a new weapon class alongside the game. Instead of taking this route, however, Capcom chose to expand upon the pre-existing 14 weapon types by adding new standalone combos and moves dependent on the environment. Monster Hunter World is a very slope-heavy game. As a matter of fact, they had to omit certain monster types for that very reason. Long snake-like skeletons did not mesh well with these landscapes. Attacking after sliding down a slope gives the player access to powerful and flashy new moves that are great for dealing mounting damage. I have nothing to say other than the fact that this shit is it. Anyway, you can run up walls too, isn't that cool? Doing this for the first time with the dual blades was beyond exhilarating. There's nothing more exciting than seeing this virtual superhuman zoom down the spine of a monster, spinning twin swords like a saw blade. It's raw as hell, Capcom. Greatsword was my main class during my playthrough, and I think it's one of the weapons that benefited the most from the World revisions. You're no longer just standing, charging, swinging, and then running. Moves like the tackle and true charge slash give this weapon a level of nuance substance that allows for a hunter to apply pressure in a manner they couldn't before. In many ways, World's weapon revisions have made Monster Hunter feel much more involved and deliberate, which I'm all for. This is another instance of Capcom making a drastic choice with the series' direction and it paying off. But regardless of how many cool gameplay elements added and revisions made, if I'm not given an opportunity to truly test those out, they may as well just be non-existent. At least I think so. The more I think about it, the more I come to realize I only had two major issues with World. The first was its lack of substance. World is the most polished and deliberate game I've played in my entire life. It's absolutely beautiful, fun, and while the game feels seamless, I'm sure the work that went into accomplishing that was anything but. It's for that reason, however, base World features such little content. Polish comes after you lay the groundwork, and it's not realistic to expect a game with World's level of refinement to have Generations' level of substance right out the gate. You have to sacrifice one in favor of the other. The other issue I had with World was its story. God damn, is that stupid. I'm not going to dedicate any energy to typing out a super in-depth breakdown of the game's narrative because it's simply not worth my time. I don't play Monster Hunter to experience gripping tales of heroism and hardship. I play Monster Hunter to cyberbully some digital wildlife. Come on people, you already know this. All I'm looking for is to have a good time, and World's narrative is anything but. It takes itself so seriously to the point where it simply becomes mind-numbing. Capcom tried way too hard to make this adventure grounded in a way that felt real to us, and the issue with that is Monster Hunter's anything but realistic. In the same game, you have a roided out cat cooking 5-star gourmet meals like it's no one's business, and you want to make that more realistic. The idea of slaying a monster to forge equipment from its body parts is pretty grim, but the series always balanced that out with lighthearted and nonsensical tones. The themes of maintaining the ecosystem and finding a balance with nature is very much present in older games. It's just not bogged down with, oh my god, nature, Elders Crossing, the ecosystem, balance the ecosystem, death begets life, this is crazy, look at the fetus, oh my god. It's like the series went from being the whimsical, refreshing, and endearing sort of stupid to just simply stupid within the span of one game. Thankfully, a lot of these issues were alleviated with the game's expansion, Monster Hunter World: Iceborne. I don't think I was supposed to actually say colon there. I'm the one who wrote this script, what the fuck? If you're gonna buy Monster Hunter World, you have to get it with Iceborne. That is just a given. There was a point where I was wholly invested in this old world versus new world debate. I genuinely thought the older games were better, and by changing the series so drastically all at once, Capcom had set the franchise up to fail. At first, I wasn't sure why I had become so invested in what I now believe to be an entirely pointless conversation. I genuinely felt my reasons behind advocating so vehemently for a return to the older style was because that was simply my preference. And then I played through Iceborne, but with my brother. World was a game I had experienced virtually solo. I would party up with other hunters, but that was few and far between. The game didn't feel like Monster Hunter to me, and I blamed that on its direction. What I forgot was the very reason I wanted to play Monster Hunter to begin with was because it is a social experience. This game series was only conceived because Capcom needed a standout multiplayer experience in their catalog. Regardless of how they go about executing each game, if Monster Hunter is somewhere in its title, the one thing you can be sure of is it's something you need to experience with your friends and maybe even your family. I am now closer with my brother than ever before, and while I don't wholly attribute all of that to Monster Hunter, the series definitely acted as the catalyst for our relationship improving. I titled this video Old vs. New World, Monster Hunter and Exploring Profoundness for two reasons. The first being this video serves as a comparison between the last and first entries in the older and newer style of monster hunting respectively. The second is because I felt Monster Hunter was the perfect avenue for me to discuss profundity in regards to art. As I said at this video's start, most people believe a piece is typically created with the intention of holding deeper meaning. What they don't realize is artists can never tell if their creation will be as heavily valued as, say, the Mona Lisa. Believe it or not, that painting was a simple commission. It was a literal business transaction, and yet now, it's one of the most recognizable art pieces of all time. That value was never innate, it was found. People saw this painting with their own eyes and decided to give it meaning. That's what profoundness is, meaning that is found. When you think about it, every person on this planet was just thrust into the chaos we call human existence. No one asked for this, and yet still here you are, without the slightest idea of what to do. It's scary and overwhelming. I genuinely believe figuring out how you want to live life is the most daunting task a person has to face. What makes life easier is finding meaning in what's around you, looking for a reason to be grateful you're alive. For some, that can be found in sports or a person, and for others, it could be found in a silly video game. People have a bad habit of diminishing what it is others find value in, and for a long time, I'd let their judgment dictate my own sense of meaning. If I was passionate about a game character and others thought it was childish or weird, I'd take that to heart and adjust myself accordingly. I was miserable for a long time because of that. And what I've realized just recently is that the only way to live your life is to live your own life. Regardless of what other people have to say, your experiences and what you value will always be true to you. You feel the way you do for a reason, just like I value Monster Hunter in my unique way for my own reasons. As I said before, life is scary and overwhelming. Finding a reason, any reason, to be grateful to be born when you were is absolutely beautiful. And unfortunately, many people will go throughout their entire lives unable to do so for themselves. So when you do find that meaning, hold on to it for dear life because it's evidence of you being alive. Again, it's your life, so live it your way. Don't let anyone take that away from you. Do not let anyone take that away from you.